Did you know it's illegal for your employer to discriminate against your spouse? Well, this wasn't always the case. Our story begins with Craig Holcomb, who was working as the associate head coach of the men's basketball team at Iona College. Iona College, however, decided they needed to make some changes. You see, the basketball team's performance had been on a downward spiral. The team's record had gone from being quite impressive, 74 wins to 50 losses from 1997 to 2001, to a less than stellar 41 wins to 47 losses from 2001 to 2004. They also hadn't made it to the NCAA tournament for a few years, so Iona College decided they were going to fire Holcomb. They claimed the reason they were firing him was because of the poor performance from their basketball team, but Holcomb wasn't buying that explanation. He suspected that there was more to it. Specifically, he thought that his marriage to a black woman was a factor in the college's decision. Holcomb alleged that both the director of athletics and the vice president of the college, who had a say in his termination, had a history of discrimination. For instance, Holcomb claimed that the director had barred his wife and many black high school students from attending events hosted by the Gold Club, an organization made mostly up of white alumni. He also mentioned that these officials had made racially charged comments about the black players on the team, other black employees, and even his wife. Interestingly, Holcomb wasn't the only one who was let go. Another assistant coach, Tony Childs, who was black, was also fired. However, the head coach, Jeff Ruland, who was white, also in an interracial relationship, kept his job. Rob O'Driscoll, another assistant coach who was white and not in an interracial relationship, wasn't fired but eventually chose to leave his position. Iona College ended up hiring 3 new coaches to replace them, one of whom was black. When Holcomb decided to take legal action against Iona College, the case eventually made its way to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. This case was unique because it was the first time this particular court had to decide whether firing someone because of their interracial marriage could violate anti-discrimination laws. The court laid out the framework for how to handle cases like Holcomb's. They explained that for someone to prove they were discriminated against, they first needed to show what's called a prima facie case. Basically, they need to present enough evidence to suggest that discrimination could be a factor. The court said that this isn't too difficult to do, and in Holcomb's case, the key points were whether he was qualified for his job and whether the circumstances of his firing hinted at discrimination. The court reasoned that Holcomb was indeed part of a protected class under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, because there was evidence suggesting his interracial marriage was the reason for his termination. They highlighted that if an employer takes action against someone because of their association with a person of another race, that's considered discrimination against the employee's own race. In the end, the court found that Holcomb had met the minimal burden of showing that his firing could have been influenced by an unlawful motive. The fact that Iona College had fired Holcomb and Childs but kept O'Driscoll, who wasn't in an interracial relationship, raised some red flags. The court wasn't convinced by the argument that Ruland's survival in the job was enough to dismiss suspicions, especially since they noted that Ruland was likely, quote, too expensive to fire. There was also evidence suggesting that college officials involved in Holcomb's termination had racially improper motives. Holcomb had put forward enough evidence to suggest that his termination might have been motivated, at least in part, by the fact that his wife was black. The court noted that in cases like this, what they call mixed motive cases, a plaintiff doesn't need to have a direct, undeniable proof of discrimination, often referred to as a smoking gun. Instead, it's perfectly valid to rely on circumstantial evidence, and that's what Holcomb did. The court even referenced a previous Supreme Court case, Desert Palace versus Costa, to reinforce that point. Holcomb argued that the college's stated reason for firing him was just a cover or, quote, pretext for what was really going on, a discriminatory motive. The court acknowledged that often when a plaintiff can show that the employer's reason is pretextual, combined with a prima facie case of discrimination, it's enough for a jury to decide that there was an improper motive behind the decision. But here's the interesting part. Holcomb didn't actually have to prove that the college's reason was entirely false. He just needed to show that discrimination played a part in the decision. The court recognized that Holcomb didn't have a ton of evidence to prove that he was fired solely because of his wife's race, but that wasn't necessary. He only had to demonstrate that the decision was partially influenced by discriminatory animus to keep his case alive and survive the college's motion for summary judgment. This case serves as a crucial reminder for employers. Discrimination claims aren't limited to direct discrimination against an individual. They can also arise from an individual's association with another person, like in Holcomb's case. While the court hasn't extended this ruling to cover other types of relationships, such as an interfaith or same-sex marriages, it's a possibility that employers should be aware of. The key takeaway is that employers must carefully review their employment decisions to ensure they are based on legitimate business reasons and to understand the potential legal risks involved in those decisions.